Assalamu alaikum. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you for having me. Thank you for returning after lunch. I'm seeing some new faces as well. It's a pleasure to be here. I want to begin my talk about conflict resolution by acknowledging my bias. I've studied conflict transformation. So whenever we are in conflict, we think that the conflict needs to end. We need to put it to a resolve, which is great. But sometimes what happens is once we've come to a moment of resolve, the same conflict happens a week later. So my challenge today with all of you is to engage in a dialogue about how to transform conflicts so that they don't happen again, which would require education, being preventative, and the proper interventions. So let's figure this all out together. You're sitting here in this audience, and all of you have your own bias as well. You each bring with you your own story. It started in the womb, it then became your childhood. It's now your relationships. It's your relationships with your parents or your lack of a relationship with a parent. It's your relationships with your siblings or lack of one. It is the relationship with your spouse and your children if you have one. It's the people you've chosen to add into your circle or the people you've chosen to omit into your circle. So in addition to these stories that we all have, we also have our experiences with all of these people. And we have how we've chosen to remember. And oftentimes we don't talk about the role of memory in transforming conflict. But how we choose to remember something is key in how we choose to handle it. It's the moment of, am I a victim in this situation? Am I remembering myself as someone who is being hurt? Or am I remembering what has happened to me in a way that's created space for me to do it differently? We have our families, and Sayyid Mustafa made this amazing point about how we have people who look alike and we put them together and we think you'll be great, there won't be any issues. So we have two people, the same cultural background, perhaps even the same ages, the same sect, they come from the same zip code, and all of these things, and you put them together, but what we fail to realize is we're putting together two people with two very different family experiences. And we're putting these two people together and they're creating a third experience. And in this third experience, they are challenging previous family patterns, they are confirming old family patterns, and they are perhaps struggling with their own family patterns. For 3 generations, there is a family who is stingy. You married their son or their daughter. You don't think that's going to seep in some way at some level? It's not to say that we are immune from our family backgrounds. There is opportunity for change when we have the proper analysis of what's actually happening. So today I want to talk to you in 3 parts. One, I want to discuss my view of what family is, because I bring my bias to that as well. Then I want to discuss what conflict actually is, and then I want to open it to interventions that we can do to reduce conflict and how to handle these situations. And I noticed in the other sessions there weren't questions, so I want to invite you all to ask questions. Maybe it's not of me, maybe you're not comfortable asking, but this is a great opportunity to talk. Chances are the question that you have about conflict is a question everyone else has too. So let's try to share and be informal and build relationship. So what is family? I'm a marriage and family therapist, so that means that I've been trained to think of family in terms of a larger system. What does that mean? It means that I see the whole system, I see individuals and their behaviors, and then I see the interaction of those behaviors with other people as creating these patterns. And this is a huge system of how it works. There's a lot of feedback, is it okay? Maybe I'll take a step back. So what we are looking at is to change the system, not to change the person and the interaction between the two people, but rather to change the system as a whole. And when we're changing the system as a whole, that's where we're actually transforming the conflict. And even when we disrupt the system and we change it for the better, it still feels uncomfortable. And that's something that we need to be honest about and address. For example, I have couples who come in, I have one person who complains that there's no affection. So they get affection the following week from their spouse. And then they say, that was so strange. I think he's just doing it because I asked him to. Well, what happens when we ask for something, we get what we asked for, and now we're uncertain about how it feels. Be honest about what you need. And there's two parts to this. One is being able to request your need, and the other is putting your pride on the side and being able to receive that need. That's the duality and the complexity of communication. It's not enough to ask. You have to graciously receive. I tell my couples all the time, put your hands up, okay? And I'll throw something. I ask them to catch it. They can't catch it. You can't catch something you're not open to. We cannot catch change if we're not open to change happening and occurring. And the greatest place change can occur is within ourselves. So we have three ideas of change. One idea is that I can change you. The next idea is I can change circumstances. And then the third idea is I can change my own thoughts, my own interactions, and my own perceptions. And it's my bias that the greatest way to transform the system is to transform the self. Draw a circle around yourselves. Fix what's in it. My couples come in, they are experts on what their spouse does wrong. Experts. They can give me a 15-minute dissertation. He's never home. He works too much. She doesn't ever greet me with a smile on her face. She doesn't realize how hard I work. He doesn't spend enough time with the kids. Wow, great. You guys know so much about the other person. What are you doing wrong? Nothing. Really? Become an expert in yourself. Become an expert in where you can be accountable. Because when we are over-functioning in someone else's space, meaning to say we are overly critical, and this is the same thing with parenting as well. If you're telling your child you need to wear this outfit every day, and you're picking out their clothes, and you're picking out what they want to eat for breakfast, and you're telling them what they can say and what they can't say, and there's no space for growth, when there's overactivity, people tend to withdraw. They don't want to have relationship because there's no space for the self. So the challenge for us as Muslims is how do you have a sense of self in this broader system of a family while keeping it unified and keeping it close together? So conflict, well, let's ask this question. What is conflict? My favorite definition of conflict is the two Chinese characters for conflict, danger and opportunity. Danger in doing nothing. Danger in mishandling the situation. And opportunity in taking advantage of the conflict, in handling it correctly, and in doing the proper thing. So we can continue this conversation from one of two modes. We can look at conflict strictly as danger, or we can see conflict as opportunity. So my bias is to look at conflict through the lens of opportunity. So when is conflict happening? Generally when our needs are not being met. I'm not feeling emotionally fulfilled, spiritually fulfilled. My basic needs aren't being met. So perhaps I'm going to engage in conflict against myself or with somebody else. And when we say conflict resolution in the family, have we taken into consideration the fact that sometimes we fight ourselves? Sometimes we do not take care of ourselves. And we either act out or act in. When we act in, we're experiencing depression. We are experiencing anorexia, bulimia, extreme thoughts. Perhaps we're even suicidal. When we're acting out, we're going out, we're having affairs, we're drinking, we're doing drugs. We need to come to center. We need to make sure our own needs are met so that we can help take care of the needs of others. There are these unspoken social contracts that occur within families and when people get married. We get married and no one gets married and thinks, oh, there's going to be an affair. Oh, my husband is going to be abusive towards me. My wife is going to be verbally or physically abusive towards me. People don't think about these things. So when they happen, there's the shock value, and then there is the emotional response. And this is another opportunity for conflict to occur. And then, obviously, communication is going to create conflict. And it's also going to reflect behaviors of engagement. And at the same time, it's the very thing needed to change the conflict. Communication's amazing like that. It's just like your brain. Our brains are amazing. They are so manipulative that we have the ability to construct any form of meaning about any given conflict at any given time. Is this conflict going to serve my needs? Or can this conflict be a means of creating opportunity to learn what we can do differently as a family, as a means to grow? Am I going to take a lesson away from this or not? You know, the Quran is filled with what? Stories. We have stories of other people and their hardships and conflicts. For what? Just to listen to? Or to take into consideration experience and then grow from it? So let's look at what doesn't work. So I just said conflict can come in a few ways. It can come when needs are not met. It can come from unspoken social contracts when these social contracts are broken. And then the third way is in miscommunications. And then I'll add a fourth is expectations. When our expectations are not being met, which is just like saying the unspoken social contract. Well, I expected that when I had a baby, my husband and I talked, and we said that this would be a shared experience and that he would be up with the baby all night, but I can't wake him up. He just doesn't wake up. I didn't sign up for that. Well, no one can sign up for something they've never experienced either, right? So is this really an issue of what your husband's doing or not doing, or is this an issue of the expectation that was created? And I'll get to interventions a little later and talk about how we can make it about the problem of the baby needing to be cared for and not the husband. That creates space. So those were the ways that we are looking at conflict in terms of this conversation. And I want to look at what doesn't work. So one of my favorite therapists, his name is John Gottman, and he has this idea of the four Horsemen of the apocalypse. That's what it's actually called. So we have four things that don't work in couple relationships, but this would apply to families as well. The first is criticism. If you want your need and you think criticism is going to do it, take a step back. It's not going to. What is criticism? You never do what I ask you to do. You're always letting me down. Every time I tell you that you shouldn't have done that, you did it anyway. That's criticism. You got a B on your test. You shouldn't have gotten a B on your test. That's not good enough. That's criticism. The next is defensiveness. We all know what it means to be defensive, right? And defensiveness usually happens when someone's being criticized. Whenever we hear the word you, whoa, did you just accuse me of something? I can't even get to what you just asked me because I now have to defend myself. So the way we talk is very, very tricky. It can make or break a relationship, really. So the third is stonewalling. Stonewalling is complete withdrawal. Someone walks in the door, all of a sudden, you won't believe what happened today. I can't even tell you, blah, 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 blah. Whoa, I don't want to deal with this. I just had the most stressful day at work. I'm going to go to my office. That's stonewalling. Or when someone tries to breach a subject, they say, this isn't a good time. I can't talk about this right now. And then the last is holding people in contempt. And when we hold people in contempt, it's when we hold them in a place of disgust and anger. So we know that these four things are predictors of divorce, and these four things are things that are going to perpetuate conflict, and they're going to lead to two very dangerous patterns, and that is the pattern of avoidance and then the pattern of escalation. And anytime conflict has escalated at its highest point, that's a point of violence. And I also work at a domestic violence clinic. So we know that all of these things have usually been happening. And in domestic violence, we're also talking about issues of power as well, holding power over someone. And power can lead to conflict as well. When someone doesn't feel like they have power in their relationship, they do this. We call it triangulation. They go to a third thing to balance it out. That third thing is either an affair, alcohol, drugs, lying, an online emotional relationship. It is something that is outside of the marriage. And we're entering this third thing into this marriage to bring balance. And it never works. There is no history of triangulation making a healthy relationship. The true key to staying, okay, so let me back up. How do we handle conflict? We handle conflict by continuously staying in the conflict in a working relationship. We don't want to be avoiders, and we don't want to engage the conflict to a point of escalation. We want to keep it in a mid-range that we can work in. What does that mean? It means that we are not functioning out of fear and we're not functioning out of anger. The moment we function out of fear and anger, we have lost choice. And we've lost our ability to analyze and strategize within the conflict. So we go back to the positive approach of conflict. There's a woman, her name's Diane Soley. She used to head up Smart Marriages, Happy Families, and she says two things. She says every couple will have 10 things that they will always disagree about. 10. You get divorced, guess what? You're going to inherit 10 new problems with somebody else. And if you have kids with someone, you still have to work on those 10 things you disagree with because there's a working relationship. There are 10 things. There's no such thing as a perfect relationship. A perfect relationship is being able to know how to work through your flaws, being able to successfully repair conflict. When we attempt to repair a conflict and it doesn't work, that's a predictor of divorce. We know that from John Gottman, the therapist I mentioned previously. So Diane Soley says, we have 10 things we'll never agree upon. And then the other thing that she says, which is really interesting, is that when we learn to argue appropriately, we can learn to fall more in love. Where is she speaking from? She's speaking from the place of conflict from the positive approach. Meaning that if we think of conflict as something positive, it's no longer scary. It no longer produces anger and fear. It creates intimacy. It takes courage. It could be clarifying. It could produce growth. It could be strengthening. And it could lead to change. Conflict is healthy when handled properly. And it allows us to meet the needs of our partner. And when our needs are met, everyone's happy. We can meet the needs of other people. So the best way to handle conflict is to engage in creative solutions. And that is through higher order thinking, okay? Now, we have two parts of our brain. You have the top part, which is your cortex. That's where creativity comes from. You cannot engage this part of your brain if your blood pressure is high, or if your heart is palpitating very fast, or if you're in that place of fear or anger. At that point in time, you're using what we call the limbic system. That's what animals use. Animals have a limbic system. Human beings have been given the gift of a cortex. Allah has given us the ability to think creatively and do things differently. So the number one question to ask yourself is, which part of my brain am I functioning from right now? Check in with yourself. How angry are you when you're reacting? Are you responding? Start with the question, is this an emotional reaction or an intellectual response? Does my action lead this relationship and family forward, or does it move it back? And the moment that we're no longer analyzing ourselves in the relationship, but rather analyzing for the benefit of the family as a whole, everyone has won. I'm getting short on time, I think, so I'm going to try to speak quickly and move to interventions. But before I do that, I want to say, I need to cite a few more things. There's a study done by Combs in 2004, and he says that conflict happens in 4 stages. One is the appearance of conflict, and then we have the absence of hope. Then we have the occurrence of creativity, which we now know can only come from our cortex when we are calm and relaxed. And then lastly, the occurrence of creativity creates the emergence of stability, which is what everyone's generally looking for. Okay, I want to move to interventions. I have a long list to share with you. So interventions, like we said, is when we want to change the system. My bias is you change yourself. That's the best thing that can happen. One of my favorite quotes from Martin Luther King is, "I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be." Meaning, within this family system, we're only our best when everyone's living up to their greatest potential. When that's not happening, everyone's suffering. And so part of meeting my own needs is making sure your needs are met too, to create balance within the system. Okay, so let's move to interventions. The first intervention is, as I said, think to yourself, am I emotionally reacting or intellectually responding? Top of my brain or the bottom? Which one is it? It is to move from using the word why. Why did you come home so late? Why did you forget my birthday? Why is the house always messy? Why did you never give me enough money? Why? We do it with our kids as well. Why did you hit your brother? Why did you make a mess? Why were you a bad boy? And we use labels too, right? The first thing to do, I want everyone to strike out the word why. And I want for you to replace it with the question of how. How can this house become more clean? How can we talk about financial management so that we make sure that there's enough money in the savings account and enough for zakat and enough for me and everybody else? How can we make sure that we have time to, rather than why are you so cold to me, how can we create affection between each other? How leads to change? How is positive and futuristic when used in the right way? The next is to enter conflict gently. Gottman says that the thing that works is when we use soft startup, meaning when someone comes home, build relationship, say hello, ask them how their day was. Do not start with conflict. The more we build, and building relationship is actually a preventative measure to reducing conflicts before they escalate. When you are very close to someone, you are very forgiving of them. We know when people fall in love, they excuse everything. Everything. They don't see faults. And then, a couple years of marriage, even a couple months of marriage, you know that I'm in love stage only lasts for 8 months psychologically. The body cannot handle being in that state all of the time. But then we forget to, sorry, I just lost my train of thought. Okay, so moving on. The next thing that we're going to do is think about separating the person from the problem. No name calling, no labeling. We want to see the interactions between the two people as the problem, not the person. The way we are engaging each other as the problem. We want to change our analysis. We want to avoid absolutes when arguing. Don't say you always, every time, you never. Avoid that completely. It's simply just not true. We want to make time to deal with conflict. If you're so busy, no problem. Set one day a week to deal with all of the conflicts you need. Set a time every day to deal with it. Don't try to deal with the conflict while one person is getting this child ready for bed and the next person is preparing a presentation for the next day. The next thing is to not argue or ask something important when you are in 2 separate rooms of your home. Happens all the time. I have couples who fight, one person's in the bathroom, one person's in the kitchen. Well, of course that's going to lead to more conflict. Be face to face. Do not fight over text messages. It's cowardice. And I tell my couples, if you can look at someone in the face and say to them what you write in a text message, and you would still agree to say it, it like rarely happens. People hide behind their phones. Don't fight or argue or make a request via text, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever you want to use. Turn off your electronics and turn on your relationships. Stand in front of someone. How am I doing on time?
No, you're doing great.
Okay. So speaking of timing, the next thing is proper timing. Don't bring up a conversation that's really important when someone's on their way to a major business deal, or when someone's on their way to a major event, or in the middle of a final exam week for someone. Have some compassion. It's all about the right timing. And so we need to create time for conflict in order to manage it. We mentioned soft startup, which is something Gottman says. I want to teach you a principle of 3 things. Instead of using criticism and accusations, I want for you to start off with an observation. I observe, so for example, I've noticed that when you come home from work, you're really tired. And I'm concerned that you're not sharing your day with me and something might be wrong. Okay? So observation, concern, and then the third is request. I would like it if you were able to talk to me about your day when you were ready. Don't accuse. Create space. So remember that. Observe, concern, request. And then ask for a time to discuss. And then once you've made a decision as a couple, ask yourselves how you will implement the decision. Couples and families make decisions all the time, but they never talk about who's doing what in the decision-making process afterward. Okay? Oh, let's put the kids in a sport. Great. Who's doing what? Who's taking that child to that sport? Who's showing up to the games? Discuss it in detail. So the next thing we know is it takes at least 25 minutes for everyone to calm down. If people are too angry, stop engaging. Take a time out with a plan to re-enter. Don't leave the house. Simply separate, calm down, do things to actively calm your anger, whether it's prayer, it's meditation, it's breathing, it's self-talk. Do something constructive with a plan to re-enter. I tell people set your microwave timers for 15-20 minutes, come back when you hear the buzz and talk about it. If the other person doesn't feel the need to calm down and there is someone who needs to talk, they can't wait. This is, if I don't get this out right now, then we're not going to be able to have this conversation. Then guess what? Preoccupy yourself with something else. Distract yourself till that time is up. Go make some tea. Get the scene prepared and begin to talk. Be careful about how many people you add to your conflict. Something bothers you, you start calling all of your friends, all of your family members, and it was something very small. And be careful who you get advice from. You're having a difficult relationship, you seek the help of someone else who's in a very difficult relationship, and then you're commiserating. And you're strengthening your positions of, I don't want to be in this relationship. Careful who you seek advice from. If it's too difficult, seek out a third party. Go to the imam. And the thing about Muslims, in terms of the Muslim couples I've worked with, they seek help when it's too late. Don't seek help when it's too late. Be preventative. Take action. There's so many more, but I'm going to wrap up with a few closing thoughts. And basically, I guess what I really want to say is, we're only as good as how we choose to handle any given moment. And the most enhanceable moments are the ones that happen within us. So living up to the potential of being the best family or the best person doesn't happen overnight. This is a journey. Transformation is a journey. So be realistic with the timeline. If you've had bad communication in your marriage for 10 years, but you are highly committed to one another, well, guess how long it might take to change it? Not 3 weeks. We can't compare 3 weeks of work to 10 years of how something was created. Be realistic in that timeline. And our humanness, at the most basic level, in my opinion, is expressed when we live in relation and response to other people, not in isolation. Where are you in relationship and in response to this larger system of the family that we've talked about? Where are you? You want change? You want the family to be close together? You change it. You change yourself. Be home. Invite people to be home. Create opportunities for family to revolve around. When we increase relationship, we reduce conflict. I want to end by saying that I hope, inshallah, we can give ourselves permission to be and do something new and to respond to our lives, not react to them. And I would like to close with a dua, inshallah. Ya Allah, we ask you to make our intentions pure. We ask you to preserve and grow the love that you've placed between us. We ask you to increase our ability to listen to our loved ones, as you always listen to us. You've promised us, Ya Allah, that there are signs for those who reflect. Deepen our reflection, increase our understanding, and make our speech plain and clear. We thank you, O Allah, for being our support when we had none, for giving love as we still learn how to love ourselves and others, for listening to us as we still learn how to listen, for forgiving us as we are still learning the process of forgiveness, for being patient with us as we are still learning patience, for being merciful with us as we are still learning to be merciful with ourselves and others. Help us to not stand in the way of our own growth, Ya Allah, and we ask you to make space within us and around us to increase the desire to serve you. Help us preserve the bodies you have loaned to us by nurturing them. Help us preserve our minds with strong remembrance of you. Help us to increase love between our family members. Help us to accept what we cannot change and courage to change what we can, starting with what is within us. Protect our children, honor our parents, and remember us who gather here today for your sake, to perfect ourselves and strengthen our families, Ya Rab. To you we turn in this moment, and to you, inshallah, we shall return. Ameen.
Nadia, this does not say anything in comparison to what you just said up here. This is an appreciation of you being here with us today. And I think I speak on behalf of everyone here. Your presentation was powerful, very powerful. And I think the words that you echoed, I saw within my own family, with my own self, the words that you used, why me, this, is exactly what I often hear. And if I take away anything about your presentation, there's two things that I really take away with. One is I'll change the why to the how, because how is, I think, very good for me to substitute the why for. And the right time to talk about conflicts is when you're down and calmed and at ease, not in the heat of the moment, which I completely agree with. And if I were to umbrella everything that you've spoken about, it all comes to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks so much about in the Holy Book, which is patience. Everything comes with patience, sabr. So thank you so much. We learned really a lot from your presentation. And you know how they have, what do you call when you have a gym trainer that, yeah, she needs to come home with us to each family to be our therapist at family at home to resolve conflicts, because she could give great advice. What I heard here today, I wish my whole family was listening in on this. Thank you so much, Nadia. Really, thank you. On to our next presenter.